Dr. Roddenberry coming to you here from my office at South Campus in Fuquay Varina. Looks like we have a couple of viewers today. If you're on the line, go ahead and drop me a note in the chat bar and say good morning. Thanks for coming in today. It's good to see you. Got my coffee. It's a little bit rainy outside, not too beautiful. You know, rainy days are always good for school because there's not as much fun stuff to do outside. So it makes it a little bit easier to do the studying, the reading, and the writing that you need to do. Good morning, Louis Tapia. Good morning, Gustavo. Thanks for coming today. Hope you're doing well. Fantastic audience here. Looks like my internet's moving pretty good. All my readings on my studios suggest that the streaming is coming through smoothly. Hopefully you can hear me really well. Looks like we've got a third person on the broadcast. Good morning, Heavenly Kirby. Fantastic. Thanks for showing up today. And Mariah's here as well. Well, fantastic. We've got a pretty good audience. So I'm going to go ahead and get started, okay? All right, so let's see. Let's go to our PowerPoint. So for the next couple of days, we're talking about Chapter 9, Motivation and Emotion. And that's what we're going to spend our lecture on for the next couple of days, talking about motivation and emotion. You might say, Chris, why do we care about motivation and emotion? Very, very important, okay? Now, I don't know if any of you have ever seen this movie, but there's a movie called Free Solo. It's about this fellow named Alex Honnold, and he is what they call a free solo climber. He climbs rocks without ropes or any protection of any kind. Here he is climbing up El Capitan, which is a 3,000-foot cliff right now, and he's doing that with no safety ropes at all, no help at all. And this guy, his biggest thing in life is climbing rock walls and doing these death-defying feats. Have any of you seen the movie Free Solo or heard about Alex Honnold? How many of you would be willing to climb a rock wall like this with no protection at all? Pretty crazy, huh? This guy, for those of you, I see we've got a couple more people jumping on the broadcast. This guy, Alex Honnold, free solos. He climbs rock faces with no safety ropes at all. Could you imagine? If he falls, he's fallen 3,000 feet from right here. I don't think, and even if you were a good rock climber, do you know what chance he takes every time he gets on those rocks? You know, you can fall 20 feet and kill yourself, and he's up 3,000 feet right now. And all of his friends have died, and everybody he respects eventually falls off that mountain and dies. And yet, Alex Honnold, and if you watch the story, this guy is semi-homeless because he spends every waking moment climbing mountains. That's all he does. He lives out in a van. He has a van, and he's got these little exercise grips in it so he can practice strengthening his fingers every day. But all this guy does is he eats, sleeps, drinks, lives climbing rock mountains just like this. And you might say to yourself, why in the world would anybody ever feel the need to do something like that? Well, that's the topic of today's discussion when we talk about motivation. Now, the fundamental difference between human and computers is that human beings have motivations and computers do not. We typically refer to your goal-driven desires as your sense of agency. An entity with agency evaluates between options, selects options, and then performs those behaviors and monitors their activity in pursuit of goals. So human beings have agency. We have goals that we are interested in. We can pick from among several goals, and then we can follow our progress towards achieving that goal. So if you think about it, computers don't do anything. My computer will sit right here and stare back at me and do absolutely nothing all day long unless I tell my computer what I want it to do. My computer has no sense of agency. On the other hand, a 1-year-old baby that wants a rattle has a sense of agency. A 2-year-old child that wants a bowl of Cheerios has a sense of agency. Hell, a 6-month-old baby that looks and reaches up to grab the little mobile in their crib is demonstrating a sense of agency. Agency and motivation is the desire that you have to select among a bunch of things you could do and pursue a course of action. Now, who knows what exactly all goes into the definition of motivations, but let's talk about the 4 properties of motivation. Number 1, motivation activates a behavior. It makes you decide that you want to do something. So motivations activate our behavior. Now, human beings can engage in more than one activity. So motivations directs our activity in different directions. So for me, I want to read books and learn. Alex Honnold, he decides to go out and climb rock mountains. So his motivation directs him to a mountain. My motivation directs me towards a library. You can then think of motivations as forces that sustain our behavior so that we do it for more than 1 minute, so that we do it for more than 5 minutes, so that Alex Honnold climbs rocks for 20 or 30 years. Motivations sustain our behavior. And human beings have different motivations at the same time. Right now, I have a motivation to teach, I have a motivation to go to the gym, and I have a motivation to get myself something to eat. Each of those motivational forces that exists inside my body is operating at different strength right now. I'd like to go to the gym, but really I'd more rather get something to eat. And what I really, really want to do right now is talk to you over the phone, over the computer, and educate you. So you can think of motivations as they activate us, they direct us, they sustain our behavior until we get the feedback we want, and motivations differ in strength. And we can also talk about 2 kinds of motivation: intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. Do you remember when we talked about behaviorism last week, and I suggested to you that people do things to achieve reinforcers and avoid punishers? You can think of behaviorism as a theory of extrinsic motivation. The motivating forces come from outside the person. The dog flips the light switch because it wants the food treat to come in from the outside world, right? You are in my class because you want an A and you want a degree and you want a job. So you're being extrinsically motivated. We can differ and differentiate that from what we call intrinsic motivation, which is when people do things because it's something inside that they want to do. Now, I love teaching, and I might even be talking about psychology without a paycheck, but right now I'm talking to you because I'm extrinsically motivated. I do this for my paycheck. When I go home at night, I read psychology books and psychology articles, not because I need them for you, but because I like to do them myself. So I'm extrinsically motivated to teach by my paycheck. I'm intrinsically motivated to read psychology because I find it interesting, right? So what we're going to talk about for the next couple of days is that aspect of human functioning that truly, truly differentiates you from computers and makes you more interesting than computers. I see that we have Juliet in the class this morning. I'm sorry I wasn't ignoring you, Juliet. I saw your chat, your good morning in the chat bar. I was just on a roll and couldn't stop. Thanks for coming in today. I'm glad each and every one of you came to class today. Actually, Let me ask you a question. Speaking of motivation, why are you here at this live broadcast? I have 60 students in this class, and I get about 10% of you. 7 of you are in class right now. Exactly why are you coming in this class? Why are you here right now? I'd like to see that in the chat bar. Tell me, what motivated you to come to the lecture this morning? What motivated you? Go ahead and I'll wait for you in the chat bar, and then we're going to try to guess whether or not these motivations are intrinsic or extrinsic. Let's go ahead and see what we got. Oh, come on. Let me know why you came to class this morning. And there is no extra credit for this answer. So you find psychology interesting and you like how I teach. Okay, Gustavo. That sounds like intrinsic motivation. You like. Okay. And Maria, okay, so Gustavo likes the lecture. He's intrinsically motivated. Maria has set up a little reinforcement program where she can't go to the beach until she finishes her schoolwork. So Maria is extrinsically motivated. So Gustav wants to be here because he loves this class. Maria is here because she wants to, she can't go to the library, to the beach until she does her schoolwork. Fantastic. Okay, and Louis Tapia is more of an internally motivated person. He just happens to like the lectures. Fantastic. So, in a sense, what we're talking about are the different motivations that you have for being in this class today. Now, if you look over at this chart here, table 9.1, this is a table which sort of highlights all the different theories of why people are motivated. So, throughout the history of psychology, as you see the statement down here, motivation has been studied in the context of many different areas of psychology. So, different psychologists have focused on motivation from different perspectives in an attempt to explain why human beings choose to do the things they do. And so there are 5 broad classes of theories right here. There's some people say that our behavior is motivated because we have these internal needs that drive us, and we have to satisfy these needs, right? So some of us have a need for achievement. We have to be an A student, so we're going to do everything we can do to make an A in this class. You are driven by a need for achievement, and there's actually a questionnaire that measures people's need for achievement. On the other hand, we could have some people, especially in the context of biological processes, they talk about drive reductions. So if you think about it, a drive reduction is your body telling you that it's out of homeostasis and it needs to get back to homeostasis. So you're hungry and your stomach is driving you to eat. As soon as you get enough food to eat, your hunger goes away. You satisfied that drive. That's drive reduction. Sports psychologists talk about optimal level of arousal. How many of you have ever been bored, right, or terrified, right? Sometimes when you do things that are too easy or not fun, you are bored. You will report being bored or unaroused. On the other hand, sometimes you'll be put in a situation where you're in over your head and you'll be freaked out and a little bit nervous and too aroused to work. And so sports psychologists focus on having the proper level of arousal to perform well. Sigmund Freud thought that human beings were driven by this desire for pleasure. And so, according to Sigmund Freud, all human behavior can be tied back to the desire for sex, the desire to satisfy a pleasurable desire that we have. And then when we talked about behaviorism is an incentive-based theory, an external factor that motivates a behavior. So when we talk, we're not even going to talk about incentives in this particular chapter, because when I talked about it in chapter 6, basically behaviorism is an incentive-based theory of motivation. Why does the dog turn on the lights? Because the dog wants a reward of food. Why does the lady run away from clowns? Because clowns scare her, and when she moves away from them, her fear goes away. So these are all different classes of theories that have been proposed to try and explain how human beings demonstrate motivated behavior in different settings. And we're going to talk about these today. That's what we're going to focus on, some of these different theories that motivate behavior. First, I want to talk about drive reduction, a biological-based theory. So, in drive reduction theory, psychologists understand that the human body, when it gets out of homeostasis, it develops a need, a biological drive, if you will, and then that causes the human being's behavior to change in such a way as to reduce that drive. So, if you look over here on the left right here, we are hungry. Our stomach tells us we don't have enough food. We eat some food. The level of hunger is now evened out because we have food where before we didn't have enough food, and the drive goes away. Same thing with oxygen. When we go to sleep at night, there's a part of our brain that measures the amount of oxygen in our blood. If somebody holds their hand over your mouth and you can't get any oxygen in, after a moment, your brain will realize you need oxygen, and it will cause you to wake up and take a deep breath, okay? Same thing with water. How many of you have ever been thirsty? That's your body telling you that you have a drive, a thirst drive. You drink enough water, that thirst goes away, and then you don't have that motivation anymore. So you can think of a drive as a biological, psychological state of imbalance that initiates a physiological response or a behavioral response designed to reestablish homeostasis. Now, these are intrinsic motivational theories because the drive comes from inside your body. And if I could, I'm going to point out one brain area which is really responsible for managing the drives that we feel in our body. It's the hypothalamus. Anything you can do too much of is probably controlled by your hypothalamus. Sexual motivation, eating, drinking, drug taking, all sort of managed by this hypothalamus. It's the control center for motivated behavior. Okay. In fact, there's research to suggest that some people have damage to a part of it called the ventromedial hypothalamus. So that's in the middle part of the hypothalamus. These people have damage to the ventromedial hypothalamus and they engage in overeating. They don't know when to stop eating. So you can destroy this little part of a mouse's brain and watch that mouse just blow up because it doesn't know when to stop eating. There's actually a different part of your hypothalamus called the preorbital area, and this is the part of your hypothalamus that regulates your body temperature. And damage to this part will make it difficult for you to manage the proper level of body temperature. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to talk to you briefly about how your brain manages the drive reduction related to body temperature. Okay, now, human beings are warm-blooded animals. Mammals are warm-blooded as opposed. We can maintain a constant temperature as opposed to lizards and snakes that have to use the sun to warm themselves up. Human beings, mammals, can maintain a constant level of body temperature. And this is why we need to eat more. You know, a snake can go months without eating, but a human has to eat much more often. And we need that extra energy because we spend that energy maintaining the proper body temperature. So, warm-blooded animals have evolved the ability to control their own body temperature. There are systems inside the body that require that the body temperature remain within a very, very restricted range. Your core body temperature needs to stay in a very narrow range in order for your body to function properly, for you not to die. Your hypothalamus, the preorbital area of your hypothalamus, defends this range by initiating biological and behavioral responses whenever your body temperature begins to move outside of that range. So you can think about, we sort of have two sets of body temperatures. You have what we would call our skin temperature, which can get high or really low. And then the internal organs in your body have a temperature we'll call your core body temperature. Now, your core body temperature is the one that really needs to stay in that restricted range, okay? That's the one that you definitely can't have swinging too far outside that range. Your skin, on the other hand, your body would like for it to stay in that normal range, but your skin can get much colder or much hotter. If you've ever been outside and gotten a sunburn and touched your skin, you know how hot it is. If you've ever been outside playing on a frozen January day and you come inside and your skin is super cold to the touch, you know what I'm talking about. So what you have, remember we talked about sensory perception last week. I suggested to you that we have sensory receptors all over our skin. Some for touch, some for pain, right? Some for tickle, some for itching. We have all these different receptors. Well, we also have these things called thermoreceptors on our skin and in our organs. And these thermoreceptors record our body temperature and send it to our hypothalamus. So our hypothalamus knows if our body is in that range. Okay? And so what happens is when your core too, but it starts actually proactively when your skin starts to move outside of that desired range, when you get super duper hot or super duper cold and your thermoreceptors on your skin tell your hypothalamus that your body has moved outside this appropriate temperature, your hypothalamus is then going to initiate some changes that are designed to either heat you up or cool you off based upon the feedback. And the idea is that the hypothalamus uses your skin as a proactive guide to keep your internal core temperature from ever getting outside of that restricted range. So it's uncomfortable when your skin gets down to 65 degrees. Ooh, that's cold. And your brain uses that, your hypothalamus uses that information and says, hey, I better motivate some changes that occur so that the core temperature doesn't drop down as low as the skin temperature does too. All right. So in a sense, your hypothalamus is maintaining your heat within this desired range. And every time your skin gets outside that range, you are motivated to change your physical and behavioral responses to move your temperature back into that normal range. All right. And you see the picture under here kind of schematically demonstrated this thermoregulatory temperature. Now, here's the deal. When your body perceives that you've moved outside of this range, it creates two different kinds of drives. One drive represents biological, physiological changes that maybe you're not even aware of and you can't even control. And it also causes behavioral changes in the animal. So when the body temperature starts to get outside of this defended range, the skin gets outside of this defended range, your hypothalamus initiates motivated behavior and motivated biological processes. And these biological processes and these behaviors last as long as it takes to get your body, your skin temperature back into the appropriate temperature range. Now, what are some of these processes? If you look at the charts, the things that I have listed down here, the biological processes that are responsible. Shivering. When we shiver, those behavioral movements, those biologically created behavioral movements, generate heat inside our core and warm our body up. So shivering is a biological response, you can't really control it, that happens to your body that's designed to generate heat in your body. Now, your blood vessels, they vasodilate, they dilate, and they constrict. So vasodilation and vasoconstriction. So your blood vessels, when you get super hot, your blood vessels dilate and get closer to your skin, and that allows heat to escape from your hot blood to your skin where you sweat, and the wind can cool it off. So when we get hot, we get flushed, and that flushed is because the capillaries and blood vessels in our body are dilating and getting closer to the skin, which reduces heat from our body. The opposite thing happens when we get super cold. Our blood vessels shrink and sort of shrink away from the skin to protect what little heat we have in our blood from escaping our body. So shivering and change in the size of the blood vessels are two biological processes designed to generate or remove heat from your body. And then when we get hot, we sweat. And the sweat works along with the vasodilation. So we dilate, the heat rises up to the skin, we sweat. As wind blows over that moisture on our skin, it creates a cooling temperature that then allows that heat that's on the surface of our skin that comes from our blood vessels to dissipate. These are sort of the biological responses that are driven by your hypothalamus. It causes your body to shiver, it causes your blood vessels to dilate or restrict, and it causes you to generate sweat. These are biological processes designed to push your temperature back in the desired range. But you know what? Animals also engage in behaviors designed to release or conserve heat. So you folks know, if you've ever been out on a cold night, and you see a campfire, what do? We go up and we huddle around the campfire. If you have a dog or a cat and they're cold, you don't need to tell them. They automatically seek that heat on a cold night. On the other hand, if you're ever out in a 950 degree summer day here in Raleigh, North Carolina, you know how to find the shade, and animals know how to find the shade. So the behavioral responses created by the hypothalamus are heat-seeking or heat-avoiding behaviors. Animals huddle together and use each other to warm one another. So huddling is a motivated behavior that's driven by a low body temperature. Animals tunnel, burrow, nesting. These are all, if you will, heat-seeking behaviors. Body positioning, laying down on the ground, curling up in a fetal position. These are heat-saving measures. If you ever stood up and let the wind blow to cool you off, that body positioning behavior is a behavioral response caused by the hypothalamus. And then we have complex human behaviors. Remember, Mom always told you if you go out, wear lots of layers so you can remove those layers on and off as it gets hotter and colder. Human behaviors of removing clothes or turning on the air conditioner or rolling down a window. Those, if you will, are complex behaviors designed to manage body temperature. So one big theory of human motivation suggests that there are brain parts in our brain that are responsible for measuring homeostatic processes and keeping humans in some sort of range. Not too much food in my belly, but not too hungry. Not too thirsty, but not super duper full of water. Not too hot, not too cold. All of these are what we might call drive reduction motivated processes, where our body tries to establish some sort of homeostatic level, and our body motivates us, our behavior and our physiological processes, to remain in some sort of defended range. So one set of theories that have been developed in the field of psychology are these drive reduction theories. Any questions so far? That's just one class of theories, one way people have thought about human motivation. Okay, now let's talk about a second area called optimal arousal. Okay, optimal arousal is super duper important in sports psychology. Actually, it's kind of important in school performance. It's important really in a lot of areas, but it really comes into focus when we talk about sports performance and maximizing people's ability to perform. Now, here's the deal. It turns out that we have this circuit in our brain called the reticular activating system. And then we have these other structures called the basal ganglia. And these are all, they're not hindbrain, they're sort of midbrain structures and subcortical structures. And the basal ganglia and the reticular activating system and the pons are all these systems in your brain that manage your level of arousal, how excited you are or how bored you are. And when we wake up during the day and go to sleep, these different parts of our brain change their activity, demonstrating either more arousal, waking up and talking, or less arousal, sleeping. And so we have these structures in our brain that generate and manage the level of arousal that we have. Now, research suggests if you talk to people, just any kind of this discussion with people for more than a few minutes, and you can find out that there are two situations that people hate to have. People hate to be bored. Have you ever been bored? Don't you hate being bored when you just don't have enough stimulation and you're just sitting there wishing something cool would happen? People don't like it when they don't have enough arousal. On the other hand, have you ever been in a situation where you're totally freaked out and what's happening scares the hell out of you? I went on a roller coaster ride with my adult son a couple of weeks ago, and I have to admit I'm kind of a chicken, and I was absolutely terrified on that roller coaster. I did not like being that aroused, right? So human brains prefer a certain level of arousal. And the idea behind optimal arousal is that human beings select behaviors that give them the optimum level of arousal for their brain. So, for example, Alex Honnold, the things that he does climbing rocks would absolutely terrify you and me. However, for Alex, that gives him just enough excitement to be happy. And in fact, they've done fMRIs of Alex Honnold's brain, and what you'll find is it is very hard to get his amygdala, his fear center, to activate. His fear center doesn't activate as easily as yours. So he needs more stimulation in order to achieve optimal arousal. Okay? On the other hand, some of you are really introverted, and what that means is you don't like a lot of stimulation. You don't like people talking to you. You don't like crowds. You don't need as much stimulation. So your optimal level of arousal happens to be lower. And so researchers have focused on the idea, the fact that there are differences in how much arousal people like. Some people like a lot of arousal and their brain likes to be aroused a lot. And on the other hand, some people's brains don't like as high a level of arousal and operate better when they have low arousal from their amygdala, their pons, and their reticular activating system. Now, where do we see people talking about optimal arousal? Well, if you look right over here, personality styles. When we get to chapter 12, it's either, or I think 13, and talk about personality in the self, I'm actually going to suggest a biological-based theory of introversion versus extroversion. It turns out that you can look at the brains of introverts and extroverts, and you can measure how active their amygdala and their reticular formation and their pons are. And what you'll see is it seems like introverts' brains, they seem to become these arousal areas seem to be more easily activated than people who describe themselves as extroverts. When you look at the brains of introverts versus extroverts, what you're going to see is it takes less stimulation to activate these arousal centers of the introvert's brain. On the other hand, the extrovert will need more stimulation for those parts of their brain to become active. And so one theory of personality suggests that it's based upon differences in the ability to achieve optimal arousal. Now, we're not really going to talk about this too much in clinical psychology, but I do have an hour-long documentary if anybody's interested. It's called The Dangerous Few. And what some people in clinical psychology suggest is that people who are sociopaths, people who break the rules and do horrible things like robbing and killing and stealing, do it for the arousal. And there's actually evidence to suggest that the reason sociopaths engage in sociopathic behavior is that they do it to arouse their brains. Their brains don't seem to want to wake up. And so for me, robbing a convenience store would absolutely freak me out. I couldn't even imagine walking into a store with a gun and saying, "Give me all your money." I would just freeze up and be just and freak out with arousal if that happened. But for a sociopath, that's the kind of excitement that they need to actually activate their brain and make them feel good. And so if anybody's interested, you should watch this. It's called The Dangerous Few. And there are psychologists who say that you can actually identify these brains, these sociopathic brains, in 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds. And it follows the story of a teenage kid who gets in trouble a lot and a little 5-year-old kid who likes to kill family pets. It's a totally freaky video if you want to watch. And then you're going to find optimal arousal used in sports psychology. And what you see over here is what's known as the Yerkes-Dodson law. Now, Yeah, it's absolutely crazy. The kid puts a cat in the microwave. He kills his grandmother's Yorkshire Terrier and seems proud of it. It's an absolutely shocking, scary, and terrifying video you should watch. Okay. Now, here's the deal. If you look at this graph down here, what you're going to notice is that we have an X and a Y coordinate. On the Y coordinate, we're talking about performance quality. You can see low performance at the bottom all the way to high performance. So some tasks you're going to do better than others. Along the X coordinate, we have level of arousal from low arousal to high arousal. Now, what you're going to notice is that we have this unipolar relationship between level of arousal and performance. What you're going to find with most activities that you engage in is there's an optimal level of arousal at which you perform best on a given task. If you don't care about my midterm exam, you're not going to study, you're not going to think about it, and so you're not going to care. And when you take my exam, you're going to perform poorly because you don't have enough arousal. On the other hand, some students get so freaked out by an evaluation. Oh my God, an exam, I'm a stupid person, blah, blah, blah. And they get so aroused that when they sit in front of the exam, they have test anxiety. Do any of you have test anxiety? You get too nervous when you're doing an exam? They have too much arousal, right? And so what the Yerkes-Dodson law suggests is that in order for performance to be perfect, we have to have the optimal level of arousal. And what you see here, the blue and the red line, represent two different people. And the person in the blue line works better at a lower level of arousal than the person in the red line. Now, depending upon the task and depending upon the person, arousal needs change. So, if I'm big into baseball, and I have a couple of baseball coaching books. And one of the things that they talk about, the psychology of baseball, is you have to learn how to control your emotions on the ball field. And so the book that I've got, written by Harvey, I forget that fellow's name, doggone it, basically talks about how to reduce the level of anxiety. Most athletes have performance anxiety. They get in front of people, they get in front of a crowd, and then they are too uptight to perform well. And so what we do in sports is we have to learn how to manage the arousal level. Now, for sports like baseball and golf, and maybe even basketball, where you're using small muscles and you're using very fine motor control behaviors, trying to knock a ball into a small cup, trying to hit a small baseball, trying to throw a basketball 30 feet into a hole. These things, if you get too aroused, your muscles won't work right and you don't perform as well. On the other hand, football and running a race are things that are pretty simple behaviors. When you're playing football, your idea is just to smash this person and try to push them back, right? That's what football players do. The more arousal, so those behaviors like running a race or being a lineman in football, the optimal level of arousal is higher than it would be for a sport like golf, where you have to make very, very careful small movements. And so what you're going to find is that sports psychologists talk an awful lot about managing the level of arousal and finding this thing called optimal arousal that leads to the best performance in human beings. So we've got our drive reduction theories, which talk about how our body maintains homeostasis. Then we've got optimal arousal, which is used to demonstrate people's differing needs for stimulation. All right. Now, briefly, I want to talk briefly about one of the oldest theories of this. And your book differentiates this. This kind of sounds to me, it's a little similar to drive reduction. Although with a need, the need never goes away. In drive reduction theories, you eat and then the hunger goes away and you don't eat until you're hungry again. On the other hand, a psychological need is something that drives you all the time. It never goes away. And the first theories of need-based theories were developed by Sigmund Freud and his group of psychologists called the psychoanalytic school. And psychoanalysis was based upon the primacy of needs. They argued that human beings are driven by these needs all the time, and every behavior that they have is developed around fulfilling a particular need. Now, so Sigmund Freud, Alfred Adler, Karen Horney, and Murray, I forget his first name, Charles Murray, their theories were all based on the fact that human beings are driven by needs. Where these folks differ is in what they say the need was. So, according to Sigmund Freud, people are driven by the need to feel good, and specifically feel good with regard to sexuality. So, Sigmund Freud argued that people are driven by this need for sex. All right. And so he argued that this need never ever goes away. He actually coined a term. You've probably heard of libido before. That's actually a term that was coined by Sigmund Freud over 130 years ago to describe people's sexual motivation. And he argued this libidinal drive is always in your body and it's always trying to get out. And he argued that human beings, our whole entire life is designed towards controlling this libidinal drive that we had, this libidinal need that we had. And he said that this libidinal need, he said that human beings follow this thing called the pleasure principle. Our body is driven to satisfy this need for sex. And he argued that sometimes this drive is so significant in us and it is so powerful that human beings have to develop unconscious strategies for controlling these drives. And he called these protective strategies defense mechanisms. We're going to talk more about defense mechanisms in chapter 13 when we talk about personality and the self. We're going to talk about need for achievement and defense mechanisms. So we're going to talk about this more in detail in chapter 13. But just to suggest that Sigmund Freud thought that humans were driven by an unquenchable need for sex. On the other hand, one of his colleagues, Alfred Adler, said, you know what? Human beings do have a primary need that drives them. He argued, though, that this primary need is the need not to feel inferior. Here's his theory. This is kind of an interesting theory. He argued that human beings are born very inferior. When you're born, you are completely helpless, and this leads to a feeling of inferiority. And he argued human beings spend their whole life trying to get over these feelings of inferiority. So he argued that we're all driven by a need for superiority. However, some people early in their life are frustrated in their attempts to learn how to feel good about themselves. And these people may develop this thing called an inferiority complex. Anybody ever heard of an inferiority complex? This is a term coined by Alfred Adler to argue that sometimes people are not able to meet this need that exists inside them, right? And then Karen Horney, a third psychoanalyst in Freud's early school, argued that really people are driven by a sense of fear, a fear of loneliness, a fear of being alone, a fear of not being secure. And so she argued that human beings are driven by a need for security. Have you ever heard of somebody being codependent? Somebody that can't make decisions on their own, somebody that needs to help them every day in everything. Karen Horney was the person who introduced the concept of codependency and the fact that other people are so driven by this need for security that they can't live without other people's support. So all of these theories over here argue that human beings have these internal drives that just can't be stopped. Freud said we're driven by sex every day. Each day you wake up, it's sex, sex, sex. And he argued that people develop ways to protect themselves from thinking about sex. He called defense mechanisms. On the other hand, Alfred Adler argued that human beings are driven by this fear of being inferior. And so we have this need for superiority. And some people who are prevented from demonstrating their competence and from doing things earlier in their life develop this complex, this inferiority complex. On the other hand, Karen Horney argued that the one thing that drove people all the time was this need to be attached to other people. And she argued that some people are so driven by this need that they develop a codependent personality, right? And then one of the things that I see as a teacher, there were tests developed for this, and we're going to take one later on in this class. Charles Murray came up with this concept of need for achievement. You ever notice that some people always have to make an A in class? Some people always have to be the fastest. Some people always have to be picked first. Some people always have to win. Those people have what's known as a need for achievement. All right? And you can think of need for achievement as a personality style, just like you can think of somebody who has an inferiority complex as having a personality style, just as you can think of a codependent person as having a personality style, just as you can think of a person with a defensive personality as having a personality style. Each one of these theorists suggested that human beings are driven by these internal needs which won't go away, All right? Now, I don't know if any of you have ever heard about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. All right? Now, each of you might be saying to yourself, well, you know what? Sometimes I'm motivated by sex. Sometimes I'm motivated by the need to feel superior to somebody else. Sometimes I'm motivated to be around other people. Sometimes I'm motivated to be aroused. But my motivations change. And one of the things that happened with these schools of thought, these psychoanalytic thoughts, was there was great argument and dissension and debate between these psychologists. Sigmund Freud thought that human beings were driven only by the desire for sex. Alfred Adler said, no, human beings are driven only by the desire for superiority. Karen Horney said, no, human beings are driven only by the desire for security and being around other people. But Abraham Maslow was the person who came upon the insight. He said, you know what? People are actually driven by all of those things at different times. Have any of you ever seen Maslow's hierarchy of needs? How many of you have ever been introduced to Maslow's hierarchy of needs? If you would, go ahead and type in the chat bar real quick. Now, you may not have understood why he would come up with these different theories of motivations. And you might say, well, this doesn't make any sense. Why would he build this hierarchy? Why would he build this triangle? What Abraham Maslow was trying to do was he was trying to incorporate all of these other personality theorists into one umbrella theory that could explain why Freud was right, why Alfred Adler was right, why the optimal arousal people were right. And so what Maslow argued, have any of you ever seen Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this below? So Lewis, what he says is human beings have lots of different needs. And what determines which need we act on is what need we have fulfilled. All right? And so Maslow's hierarchy of needs argues that personality is directed and is created by need deficits. However, there are many different human needs, and our behavior is motivated by the needs we have not fulfilled. And he came up with this idea of prepotency. Some needs are more basic and must be fulfilled before the other is fulfilled. So, really, you don't need love if you're hungry. If you're thirsty and about to die because you haven't had anything to drink, you don't need love. You don't need security. You don't need to climb a rock wall. You need to fill that prepotent need. And so he has this hierarchy where he says that most people, you have to eat and drink before anything else. Once we've done that and filled these basic drive reduction needs, we then look for safety and security. If you think about it, safety and security is what Karen Horney suggested, and acceptance and friendship. Those are sort of, if you will, Karen Horney's need for security. Good self-opinion, accomplishments, and reputation. If you think about it, this is kind of what Adler was talking about when he was talking about people needing to feel good about themselves. And these are all what you would call D needs. You need to fulfill them until you get enough. And then the neat thing about Maslow's hierarchy of needs is he answers the question, why do people like Alex Honnold climb mountains? Is there any need to climb a mountain? Why do some people feel the need to go into space, right? Why do people need to climb Kilimanjaro or these tall mountains? Why do people do that? And what he argued was once we've fulfilled all of these deficit needs, things have this desire to be all they can be, to fulfill their dreams, if you will. And he argued that those people, all these other needs, people like Alex Honnold, are engaged in self-actualization. And if you open up a kitchen to feed the homeless, if you write a book, if you hike through Alaska, you may be fulfilling some sort of lifelong dream. You may be engaging in self-actualization. Yeah, it's just started to lag. I just got that. Okay, now that I'm back on, you know what? That was a slide I was going to talk about anyway. I'm sitting here in school and I'm not sure why my internet is not doing well, but that's kind of making me annoyed. But I am done anyhow. Folks, have a great day. Don't forget, it's Wednesday night webinar at 7 o'clock. If you don't do the webinar, remember you do have to do the discussion board. But please, I hope you come to the webinar tonight so we can talk about motivation and what people do. All right, great. Have a good day.